Yo, so I started reading manga at the very beginning of quarantine as I had nothing to do and couldn't buy comic books at the time. So over the years of reading all kinds of genres of manga, I eventually found Isekai manga, often generic, boring, and unrealistic, with the main protagonist being this know-it-all dude who is just above everyone and everyone else and everything and power and intelligence and all that. This style of writing was clearly developed as a means of escape from the real world, which at the time in quarantine was a good read. However, after looking through my reading history after quarantine, I've collected a list of 24 isekai and fantasy manga that I'll be rereading the first 5 chapters of, giving a brief summary, and then placing in this tier list. I'll be ranking the manga on 5 different tiers from D, C, B, A, and S. A meaning sort of decent manga, B meaning a pretty bad manga, C being something that should only be read ironically, and D meaning it needs to be burned. Finally, S means it's a pretty good manga that is on par with manga similar to it, such as Solo Leveling, Full Metal Alchemist, etc. But first, what are my credentials? What acclaims me to be the judge, jury, and executioner to say if these mangas are good or not? The answer is nothing. So please take my opinion with a grain of salt. If you like these manga, then that's good for you, but me personally, nah fam. Anyway, let's get reading. This manga is slightly less generic, however that's not necessarily a good thing. The story starts off with the main character being found by his slave parents who discover he is half-elf. Then within the first chapters the author kills the mother and father and places the burden of younger sisters on the main character before aging him up by about 8 to 10 years within the first 2 chapters. In the 3rd chapter we learn that this world has an emperor who was once a slave, much like our MC, but through hard work and entering into the academy he became the said emperor. The main character attempts to show off his skills in magic to the emperor by tricking him into thinking he calms some bulls. However, this ends up just getting him sent to a prison camp where he spends his days mining away and occasionally guarding the place. However, the camp is soon attacked by monsters. But luckily, before our main character is about to die, the camp captain's reinforcements arrive, which for some reason is the emperor himself, which makes no sense as how does this lowly prison captain have such a connection to an emperor? And let's assume theoretically they do know each other, which apparently in later chapters they do. How can someone of that high of a position truly drop everything and come to someone's aid? Well, I guess so, because he can apparently, and he saves the main character. Then, through some more magic, MC powers, he is made to be the adoptive son of the families that owned him by the emperor. This manga feels rushed. I feel like the author could have just started the story with him at the academy and then introduced the MC's backstory. The rushed feeling highlights the genericness of the story, which just makes me want to predict what happens next. Like, I bet this character eventually becomes the love interest. So, with all that considered, I would put this manga at C tier. Basically, this manga on the surface level looks to be like a generic isekai with a generic protagonist and all that, but through further backstory in between the main plot, we learn that he has this necklace of powder, and he once had a pet that was burnt by a noble, which I think is really interesting as it separates the character Heel, our main character, from generic isekai / fantasy manga protagonists. Everything else in the plot is pretty generic though, and I'd say it's on par with Slave B, so C tier.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Alright, so there's this dude Fate, who is a hungry, generic fantasy protagonist, who gets a classic bullying act in the first chapter, and then most definitely future love interest pulls up and saves his hungry ass. Then, after killing a dude, his skill gets activated and he becomes stronger. Now, let's have a vote on what happens next. Does he A. Fight his old bullies, B. Suddenly get with love interest, C. Grind and become OP, or D. Get a sweet-ass magical talking sword? The answer is D. Gets a sweet-ass magical talking sword. But I imagine all of those happen in the future anyway. And with it, he grinds some goblins, chops this dude up, made the MC bullies look scummier, and brought MC and love interest closer together. Slay a little more gobs, and then that's the end of chapter 5. I would say this manga's not particularly bad, but not really good either. It doesn't really have anything that separates it other than the MC's skill, which is also similar to a lot of manga I've read in the past. So for now, C tier. Sword Art Online, but instead he offs himself and is isekai'd into the game, and this time the MC is OP in looks but not strength. So in order to make himself the OP dude once again, he plans on using potions to weaken his enemies and take all the XP for himself. Honestly, I got bored of it by chapter 3. It was pretty generic, so C tier. Alright, so there's this dude who's living in the shadow of his childhood friend slash babe. And so, to escape, he changes his appearance and decides to become an adventurer. But through signing up at the guild, he discovers that he is OP in magic, because of course he is. To this point, I was okay with the story, as it seems like a revenge arc kind of thing. But then they introduce this girl whose entire character is designed to give information to the MC and make him look cool, which kind of ruined it for me, as she's supposed to be on par with the MC in terms of magic power, but instead her character just thinks of him as way better. This manga does have a possibility of a good story, so for now I'll place it in B tier. So this dude was betrayed by this dude, and in his final moments uses a reincarnation thingy where he appears in a fantasy world with all his old yokai powers. What are those? I don't know, but they involve these paper dudes. Then boom bap bop, people learn he's OP, but while at the Magic Academy, cause this is an Isekai, get with the program, he meets this dude who looks similar to the person who killed him in his previous life, and turns out they are also OP, possibly more OP than the MC. That's pretty much the setup to the story. I would say, although generic, it does have some stuff that's different and a little interesting, but still in the end a C tier. This is the first manga that has actually concluded and wrapped up its story, which is rare to see as often they are cancelled or never finished. Basically, think of your average fantasy world, but this time, when a person becomes an adult, which for some reason is 15, they are given a weapon by God. Now, our main character and his childhood friend are of age for the ceremony, and his friend is given the hero role while he is given the blacksmith role, which is considered useless as everybody already has a weapon. So, after being sad for a bit, he soon discovers that the blacksmith role not only works for weapons, but objects also. Oh, and it's more of a magic spell to make stuff, not cool traditional way of slamming a bunch of metal together. But that's essentially what happens within the first 5 chapters. I'd say it's got a pretty interesting start, although generic. The circumstances our character is put into is also very interesting, so I'd say it's an A tier. Dude gets stabbed, which is pretty badass, and then isekai'd into the fantasy world, where he awakes as this white-haired schmuck called Kane. Then, quick time skip, he's 5 and he gets to test his magical prowess. Through them traveling to the temple, we find out Kane started practicing magic early. As he prays to God, we get to meet all of them. And they're like, yo, we know you are reincarnated. Can you help develop our world? And he's like, yeah, sure, bro. And then they all give him special powers that unlock his OB abilities. So our MC is like, I want to explore the world. So his dad is like, sure, pal, you got to train till you're 12 though. So after some training, they pull up to the guild to have a sneak peek before he's 12, where they grab a quest, kill a horned rabbit, and that's where chapter 5 ends. C tier. This is the most generic manga I've read out of them so far. D tier. Ludus was an emperor in his past life who was slain by his own people for the sins of his brother and father, and for being able to control monsters. Then, upon his death, he was reborn into a world similar to his own. However, the one difference is that less people have no magic due to their lack of education. After spending some time at the village, he decides he wishes to leave as his past life was kept within castle walls. So, with permission from the town elder, he is granted access to become an adventurer. After leaving for the guild, he runs into one of his old comrades, a slime, Rune. From this he learns it's been 1,000 years since his death. Then he fights some dudes, cures a heroine, and that's chapter 5. So this dude was once a prince who died after fighting this dragon, but before he died, he reincarnated himself. However, sadly for him, he is a slave bound by his crest. But in this life, he is born into a family of fighting slaves, so at least in this life, he has an opportunity to improve his body. After a quick time skip, MC's father says he's being sent out to become a guard slave to a princess, but she's like, nah, I'm good, don't need a slave. Yes you do. No, don't. Yes you do. Alright, fine. Boom, first quest shenanigans, and that's the end of chapter 5. A tier, the art is hella nice, and I like the plot so far. dude is summoned into another world, but instead of becoming the hero to some greedy kingdom, he decides to simply walk out. But when at an inn, he discovers one of his abilities is to summon food from his old world. So, while he escapes the kingdom cooking food for the adventures he hired, this wolf shows up and is like, yo, can I have some food? I'll let you be my owner and whatnot. And so he's like, yeah, sure. Then, after successfully escaping the country with his new dog, cooking up all kinds of delicious recipes, he decides to make some money. This is more of a slow-paced isekai that is more akin to a slice-of-life anime, but I quite like it. A tier. Before I start, the anime for this manga, Kamikatsus, was well known about a year back because it had really bad CGI for one of its scenes, this monster here. Which is such a shame because as I was reading through this same scene in the manga, it was really funny enough to make me smile, which is such a shame because you usually don't get that experience in manga, and especially in these types of manga where they're isekai/fantasy. I think these first 5 chapters have been really interesting, with the MC being a son to a cult leader before being sacrificed from his dad. But at the very end of chapter 5, they suddenly skip a month in the future where everyone suddenly has tractors and modern tech, which really brings down the story and all the build-up from previous chapters. So, if it weren't for that, I would probably be putting this manga in S or A rank, but instead I'll be placing it in B. Okay, so there's this dude who fell down a hole in a dungeon and now has to survive without his glasses and a bad sense of direction. Meanwhile, on the surface, this girl is training to reach him. I think this change in perspective is pretty cool, so if they keep it up throughout the manga, then I'd say it's a pretty good little fantasy read. A tier.
Oh, that is whack!
This dude dumps this chick's ass for this chick, and our MC, this dude, is an isekai fella who ended up in a smartphone game world. He's a mad little emo because if the story event continues to play out, eventually a war will occur according to the phone game storyline. But luckily it hasn't happened yet, as we are 8 years before it, so in order to prepare, our MC needs mad money, and to do so he does quests for the Adventurers Guild. Then, quick time skip, he's got all the money he needs. That's basically all that happens in the first 5 chapters. Pretty good, balanced pace, B tier. Really predictable. I could tell by just reading the first panel where the story was gonna go. I'd say this is like grey mush. Like it does the thing it's intended to do, which is feed you, but it doesn't have any flavour. D tier. This dude has reincarnated 3 times now. The first time he became the best at magic, the second, swords, and now in his 3rd attempt, he's just going to do what he wants. So in this new world, he makes a slime friend, because of course he does. He then becomes friends with a furry by saving him from a monster, then defeats a big old monster, and that is basically all that happens. Mad generic, but what else can you expect from an isekai? C tier. MC is reborn, however this time with a twist, as he was a king with multiple people wanting to kill him, unlike the average MC who just starts out as a regular dude. Then, after being reborn with his new parents Alice and Ray, he slowly discovers this new fantasy world that is similar to his home, but medieval, and a slightly different magic system. With his intelligence still intact, he decides to sneak into his mother's study and learn the ways of the world through meditation and learn magic. Although the start sounds pretty ordinary, the pacing was nice, and I believe it's worthy of S tier, as although I have only read the first 5 chapters, I still want to read more. And projects like Solo Leveling also started out generic, but it was slight changes they made that made them stand out from the crowd, which I believe the beginning after the end achieves. That's some of the manga I read during quarantine. I've got more to talk about, so if you want to see what else I've read, please press like and subscribe. Happy reading. Bye.